Welcome to the JH Insider Podcast, the show where we delve into industry insights and trends and share stories from JH experts and guests. Before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast today. We pay our respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm your host, Evan O'Hanlon, five-time Paralympic champion and accessibility consultant with Jensen Hughes. In today's episode, we'll dive into the accessibility service line of Jensen Hughes, bringing you an interview with David Godding of Morris Godding Access Consulting fame, a former director and founder of the company in 2001, and a key driver of its success before its acquisition by Jensen Hughes in 2022. Whether you're here to learn something new, be entertained, or get inspired, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe and follow Jensen Hughes, the JH Insider Podcast, from wherever you get your podcasts, or visit us at www.jensenhughes.com/Pacific. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. David, welcome. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Evan.
I guess for the first episode of the JH Insider Podcast, we need to start at the beginning. And if we're talking accessibility and universal design, that means we should start by getting your story of how your journey into access consulting started and the story behind Morris Godding Access Consulting.
Yeah, look, it's a really, really good question. So I was working out on the Olympics with a crowd called Evans and Peck. I was a civil engineer by training, and I was working out in the development team building out the Sydney Showgrounds. And a part of my job was to bring all the consultants aboard and implement their recommendations into the showgrounds. And that's where I met Nick. So Nick was the access consultant.
Nick Morris, that is, of Morris Godding Access Consulting fame also, yes?
That's right, Nick Morris. Met Nick Morris at the Olympics, at the showgrounds. And we got on like a house on fire. He would tell me, as an access consultant himself, what he needed to be implemented. As a civil engineer, I would push back because access costs money. And so I pushed back, but as I pushed back, I learned, because Nick, being a very forthright character, really pushed what he needed, and I listened. And, friendship grew from that. I learned about access, but at the same time, I was pretty happy doing what I was doing. We became great mates throughout the Olympics. I kept on doing what I was doing, working for the Olympic Coordination Authority. And then got to a point, though, with my company, Evans and Peck, where they took me off the Olympics and put me onto something else. And I did not want to do that. But they were pretty adamant that I do it. And then I realized I was just a profit center. So I called up Nick and said, mate, what can we do together? And I guess that's when the company was born. From that moment, I can picture as clear as day in his place in Potts Point, and I went around there, and he gave me my first job, actually, which was on the old entertainment exhibition centre, which was a real eye opener. It was just an audit of that, but it really started the ball rolling, and we never looked back.
Perfect, great story. Do you think it was Nick's enthusiasm or alone, or do you think also it was problems you could see in the built landscape or the benefits you could see from access consulting that really pushed you towards it?
I looked at this saying, well, the aging of the population, one thing. You had 19% of the population have a disability. And I just thought that there was something here. My bosses at Evans and Peck thought I was mad. But I decided to give it a go, because, Christ, that's what we do as Australians. We just give things a go. And so to me, it was just sort of natural thing to do. It really allowed me to explore, my bent towards marketing. And back in those days, it was much difficult than what it is today. Today's generation really wants to do the right thing. for people with disabilities. There's a real empathy there. But back in the day, there wasn't empathy at all. Like there's almost like a cost benefit analysis that would go on, and people saying, okay. And I know one large company in particular would say to me, well, how much does it cost to put a lift in there? And how much does it cost to if someone goes to court and sues you? That's the way they would work it out. And a lot of builders would say to me, well, a person in a wheelchair, well, shouldn't they just stay home because that's where their TV is, the kitchen, that's where they're most accessible. They don't need to go outside. And which is obviously the wrong thing. But and back in those days, it's a bit like you get into a lot of shouting matches, trying to push what you thought was the best practice accessibility. And back then, there was no such, well, there was minimum compliance, but it was like really bad minimum compliance to the point where it was just flat out discrimination.
Next question was going to be, obviously there was that difference, right? It's changed. The landscape has changed a lot. What do you think has changed the most would have been my question, but you can keep it short because you've almost answered that in that the industry acceptance of access consulting has changed a lot, I think. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Industry acceptance, but when you actually pare it back to the individual components, I gave a story before about builders. But at the end of the day, though, builders really don't, as long as it's on the plans, as long as they can build, and that's all they care about. What builders hate is when you come along and say, well, that's wrong, fix that up. And then they realise, well, there's a big cost implication there, not only to the whatever they have to unravel and fix up again, but to the length of the project and liquidated damages. That's why they really push back. But it's the architects. I think the architects have changed the most, because back then they were really worried about, oh my God, that ramp is going to impact on my beautiful building. So it was function versus form. They weren't really worried about the functionality of the building, about the uses of the building. What they were worried about was how beautiful it looks. Where I think now the architects really, especially the young ones coming through, they really want to do the right thing. They really want to make sure that everyone, regardless of their abilities, can access the building in the most equitable way possible.
Yeah, we definitely live in a different world compared to access consulting in 2001 when you started. Do you think that there was a point or even a project or two projects that you've worked on where you really noticed the difference, or that maybe changed a couple of minds in the process?
I don't remember the jobs, but I remember the people. I just remember the people, the architects, the young engineers. And I always told my team that you've got to be nice to everyone, right? You've got to work with everyone in a very collegiate manner. You don't butt heads. You work together to find a solution, because today's site engineer or its young architect is tomorrow's CEO of that company or a company. And if you can get along well, I guess that's how that's how it became a success in access consulting. I was just very collegiate and worked with people, and to get a solution, find a solution. It was a bit of push and shove, but at the end of the day, find a solution, and you get a name for that. You get a name for the guy that comes in, troubleshoots, find a solution when it seems to be sort of seemingly intractable, and you go forward. And like I know now that, I've worked with many engineers that are now like head of companies. I'm like, Stephanie Graham at Lend-Lease is like the managing director of construction there, and many others. They're just, it's amazing how well they've done. But I feel quite proud of the fact that I taught all these people about accessibility. And now they make sure, say, for example, we're using Steph as a great example. Accessibility now is the number one, I think, thing they want to bring into a project, because a big company doesn't want to go to court over anything, to a civil court. But more importantly, they don't want to be tried in the court of public opinion. And that's where it happens in newspapers and radio and TV is someone feels like they've been discriminated against, they go straight to the media and all of a sudden there's a Lend-Lease building. Never happens in Lend-Lease now. Lend-Lease are just full on accessibility, and I've worked with all the top guys at Lend-Lease and they make sure that all their projects are just like best practice accessibility. And this is not Lend-Lease, it's Multiplex, it's, Stockies, it's Mirvac, and I guess that's what I feel my most proud. So I didn't answer your question there, Evan, because it's about people, but I mean, my favourite building in Sydney is probably One Shelley, which is the diagrid on the outside because up against civil engineering training. The white diagrid with all the forces that hold up the building is transferred to the diagrid on the outside of the building. It's just right next to Barangaroo. One I remember was 126 Phillip. Not 126 Phillip. 20 or 30 Hickson, which is the Bond, which is the old Lend-Lease building, because I think that was done in 2003, and that was really the first big job I'd been on. And I remember two ladies on that, Sarah Crennan and Tony Bloom. They both done really well for themselves again, and working with them was a real blast. It was a fantastic job. Went through it. It was just one of those seamless jobs. I'll always remember that one.
Perfect. I think we'll have to mine this podcast, go back and figure out who we need to interview next and get them to put their hand up to come on to the JH Insider podcast. You've named a couple of big names there. Jumping forward into the future from Morris Godding, what really led to the decision to merge with Jensen Hughes?
It was deep in the heart of COVID at the time. An email came to me from M&A company out of New York, and I just thought it was just rubbish. I just thought, that must be spam. And I kind of emailed Nick. I said, mate, did you get this email? Because he was on it, and he goes, yeah, I did. So I ended up sending an email back, and that kind of started the process. Because honestly, Evan, I just thought, who would buy an access consulting firm? Honestly, that's what I thought. And I just thought, well, I'll have this company until the day I fall off the perch. But the conversation started, and they were fantastic. Jensen Hughes was fantastic to deal with. Maurice Conroy and Raj Pankaj, they were really good fellas to deal with. And we just they were all about people, and that's what I was most concerned about. My staff, and we just sort of went through the process. And they didn't try to push it. We got together an information memorandum for them, and but it was a slow process.
Do you think what are the biggest benefits for the clients and the projects that we work on now that you are part of the Jensen Hughes family?
Look, I think it's just to be the figurehead, really, to use all of the people that I've met before, to go in and talk to them and push, the whole JH. We have a worldwide network, and it's just not Access Consultants in Australia, even though we probably are the biggest office, but there's Access Consultants in Canada, there's Access Consultants in America, there's Access Consultants in the Middle East. And, we can hand on heart say that, we do a lot of work around the world, and we can bring what we do in Australia, which I think is probably best practice compared to the rest of the world. More cutting edge, definitely. And we can show clients here in Australia that we have all these other offices around the world doing access, and we can bring in what they think, because everyone's got different standards, guidelines. The Americans got the ADA, the American Disability Act. And I'm not saying that our standards are better, but it's always great to go off to other countries and see the way they do things and bring in that kind of experience and standards and the methodologies to Australian projects. Because that's what, our codes are based on principles, and requirements back from 1975. That's 50 years ago, right? So it's a long time ago. And yes, of course, they've been added to bit by bit as we've gone along, and that's been great. But, there hasn't been really full-on research done to the codes of people with mobility aids that obviously have come a long way in 50 years. So it's really good to utilise what we're doing in other countries to bring in here to say, okay, look, yes, here's our deemed to satisfy here, but is there something, and is there another way we can do things to ensure the same degree of equity and dignity and independence?
Yeah, I can definitely see the benefits. I'll be in a meeting on Wednesday morning in 2 days' time with the some of the access consultants from around the world with Jensen Hughes. So we get together, I think it's once a month or once every few weeks, and we talk about what's going on. I did a conference the other day for Fire Australia. I presented about emergency evacuation for people with disabilities. And in that access meeting with the global team, I was able to bring up that I'm going to do this presentation, and they gave me heaps of ideas to talk about. So, and some of them have gone further than us in solving certain problems. I think you're correct in what you say that Australia is world leading, but then there's certain areas where they have some better ideas than us, and it's great to be able to share that.
Yeah, I was speaking to the guy from one of the guys up near Seattle area, and he was talking a lot about neurodiversity and autism. And our codes don't really go into that. Our codes are predominantly focused on mobility impairment, in particular wheelchair users, because that's obviously the most highest degree of mobility impairment there is. But we certainly have provision for vision impairment, hearing impairment, but we don't really go into that neurodiversity side of things. So it's really good to talk to these guys about that.
Yeah, not yet, but I think we're getting there because we're starting to, and part of the, I guess, value of Jensen Hughes, because we have such a broad range of access consultants from just across Australia and the world, is that we get input from all these guys and we're able to morph that into further than access, which is universal design, obviously, and Nick was a big preacher of that, and yourself as well. There's obviously all those huge benefits of being part of Jensen Hughes. What was it like navigating the cultural integration between the two organisations?
Look, the biggest thing, yes, has been, we were an SME, Jensen Hughes were corporate. And I was very much used to corporate from civil engineering days. I understood the need, what's required, policies and procedures. Morris Scotland, we never had policies and procedures. We never had to do timesheets. So I think that's been the biggest issue for the staff, is getting their heads around the engineering world and what's required.
Yeah. No, if we're looking at an organisation that wants to improve their accessibility, what kind of advice would you give to those organisations? Let's say it's a major bank and they want to improve their accessibility around Australia. Where do you think the most impact is going to come from, or where do you think the first step might be?
Don't hire a building code consultant, right? Which most people would, because they will give you minimum standard. You, by all means, hire an access consultant, but only for advice, really. Where you will get the biggest bang for your buck to make the most change in your organisation is listen. Like, go out to your staff with disabilities and talk to them. Do surveys of them. Like, 19% of the population have got it. The big banks have got, say, for example, they had a requirement that they hire a certain percentage of people with disabilities. That's in their charter. It's in their action plan. So they definitely have got lots of people with disabilities there. So go out to the thousands of people that you may hire, that you have on staff, and do a survey. get a really good survey. Actually, you can use an access consultant to get the survey together, and create a space where they can fill the forms out, to do interviews with them, and to find out what they want in their buildings. Because you will get more feedback from them than what you will looking at like AS 1428.
Yeah, and that's universal design, right? You're
Yep.
trying to make the environment the most useful for the most number of people with the fewest resources, right? So that it's sustainable as well, because you're not using 3 times the amount of concrete and 3 times the amount of money to make it. That's universal design to me, trying to make the environment the best possible way that will last the longest and still be usable in the future.
Yeah, you've just led me to my soapbox, Evan, and you can't let me stay there without talking a bit more about it. Way buildings operate is that, as we've pushed universal design. A lot of the times it doesn't happen because the client doesn't have to do it. They can just follow minimum compliance, which is the BCA, and that's fine. 100% that's fine. I think what needs to be done is that what the problem is at the moment we've got is that there's all these new developments coming online that are pretty good in terms of accessibility. Let's just say of the total pool of buildings in Australia, say maybe 5-10% new developments, 5% new developments. There's so many other buildings in Australia that just aren't accessible because they're just being built over the last few decades, going back. And when a building is handed over from a compliance point of view, whether it was like yesterday or 10, 20 years ago, it's just forgotten about. And the most important thing is to make sure that people, the users of the building, understand that of what the spine of accessibility is in their building. And it's important for property building managers to know that what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses of their buildings. Every building's got strengths and weaknesses based on the person with a disability, based on what their abilities are. Management plans need to be put in place. And there's no good for a building manager to put their head in the sand, saying, I don't need to know about it. I don't need to know about what my risks are in my building, because as soon as I know I'm liable, well, of course you're liable. It doesn't matter whether you know or not about it or whatever, but we've got to make sure that management plans are in place, especially for emergency egress. So accessible egress does not exist in Australia, which is a travesty. Overseas it does.
There's no requirement to provide it, or it could be argued, right? There's some performance requirements that I think it's D1, P1 that could be understood to require it, but it's not being enforced, and so it's lacking a lot. I think, and this kind of leads to my next question is, I was going to ask you about, do you think technology, how do you think that would shape the future of accessibility? But when I was looking at this conference that I did the presentation for the other day, I think that technology is going to influence that part of accessibility heavily, right? How do we get people out that can't use the stairs, that can't use the lift is obviously turned off because there's a fire, you can't use it. Are we using emergency egress lifts? Are we developing other solutions? And maybe, I know it's, spitballing and everything, but maybe drones play a part in evacuation in the future.
Maybe.
I'm allowed to be wrong. You can tell me I'm wrong. Don't worry.
Oh, look, I'm sure something will happen, but I think there needs to be a serious adjustment of people's attitudes in the building industry and the property industry. It's a responsibility thing, and a lot of people just, again, as long as they're compliant with the BCA, they're pretty happy about that.
Yeah, and at the moment the BCA is not requiring that emergency egress for people with disabilities or people with access needs, and there's no deemed to satisfy requirements, right, for an emergency lift, for example. So that means that the onus of designing and proving and ensuring that it works lands on the shoulders of the person writing the performance solution for that lift, with the air pressurization and all of the above that you need to make that work.
Hmm.
If that was explored and then became a DTS solution, a deemed to satisfy solution, then it would be more likely to be taken up because the risk is lower as well. There's no insurance risk on the person having to write the performance solution for it.
Yeah. Things can be done now, right, under a management plan that a building owner will say to every tenant moving in, you need to have a management plan for your tenancy, and this is what you need to have in it. Your fire warden, which most organisations have now, your fire warden needs to understand from an accessibility point of view what to do, to understand in that building if there is any way of getting people out of the building. Some buildings actually have, fire, smoke, refuges. They've been built in there. Some buildings have call buttons where you can call down to make sure the fireys understand exactly what level they have to go to get that person out of the room. A lot of people put comms in fire stairs, and so a person can wait there. But I think the most important thing is to get the people out of the building. You can't let people wait somewhere. There needs to be a management plan for a fire warden and a couple of other capable, strong blokes, whatever, to assist someone in a wheelchair down the stairs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To put them over their back, whatever it is, and to get down the stairs. And that until such times as drones or flying helicopters or whatever, which is Christ knows when that happens. But we can actually do stuff right now to make sure people get out of the building.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be expensive, right? You can have personal evacuation plans. You can have special alarm. You can have
alarm in your.
Yeah, we just have alarms that use sound at the moment. What about sight? People that can't hear the alarm, for example. But I know we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole, so I'll pull you back. And I'll ask you a question. We've gone through a lot of the misconceptions of access consulting, and we've talked about a bit of technology. Where do you see, and maybe this is just continuing our rabbit hole, but where do you see the field of access consulting heading in the next 5 years? I know part of the benefit of Jensen Hughes is that we can combine our services, right? So we have the BCA, we have fire, and we have access, and we can go and work on solutions like we were just talking about. And do you think that is the future of access, working across codes and helping to solve problems in design, or do you think that we stay strictly as consulting?
Well, I think I'll go back to the 19% of people with disabilities. There's a lot of people with disabilities. And over the last 5 years, that has splintered into so many permutations and combinations of disability, like the unseen disability that you don't even know, you wouldn't even know a person has, where different types of disability out there. And the way I look at this accessibility, and I used to drop the thing about the ramp, but there's so many different types. An access consultant really has to be a generalist. Mm-hmm. I'm not a specialist. I can't tell, I don't know all the stuff I need to know about. Here's the wise man who said, the more you know, the more you don't know. I know nothing about, I really don't know much about vision impairment. I know through Jennifer Moon from Guide Dogs, she's taught me a hell of a lot, but there's so much I don't know.
And maybe that technology piece is, and I've seen it already, is that we're getting more people with disabilities into the space of access consulting, or at least being able to help us, inform us, because it's so easy to now ring someone from Victoria and have a conversation face to face online. Then there's the screen readers, so that people with vision impairments can operate in a information based system. I think technology might be helping us to get more awareness just simply through getting those 19% of people into our. Yeah.
Where I think this is going to go is that I think that building, BCA consultants will more and more stop doing access.
Yep.
Because as universal design tsunami gets bigger and bigger, BCA consultants will realise, well, I can't really do this. I don't really understand the intent of the code. I understand the wording of that clause, but I don't understand the intent of the clause. And I think as we go along, I think they'll realise it's riskier in this world. The legal world that is in America that's slowly but surely coming to Australia. They will stop doing accessibility, and I think there'll be more and more people required to do accessibility. That's what I think it'll go.
Yeah, so it'll become more and more niche. Even though it was niche to begin with, it'll just become niche because of the amount of information and resources and people that you need to know and understand to be able to be informed enough, right, to make that decision.
But at the same time, it will become more prevalent too. Tell you why I got lucky. I got lucky because David Richmond, who managed the construction and delivery of the Olympic Games, he had one leg shorter than the other, and he grabbed the accessibility to say was the last priority in the list of priorities of building. He dragged it up to like number 2 or 3, and then he made sure that every council had their own. They dragged someone from the council who had a disability or the part of disability group within the council area to be a part of the Olympic Coordination Authority Access Committee. And all of a sudden, all these people who were previously unheard of, who never had a voice, all of a sudden had this voice of tremendous power within the Access Committee. And I kid you not, Evan, to every job there was out there. And I'm sorry, mate, that I'm going off and side tangent.
No, not at all. This is the best content. Don't worry.
Every job, like when we're talking about building a huge Sydney Olympic, stadium and the Sydney Olympic, the multi-use arena and the pool and the showgrounds and the cycle track and whatever, the tennis centre, all that down there. Every one of them had to come up there with their architects and talk about accessibility of what they're about to build.
Yeah.
Because they had no idea, and they were talking to all these people, and these people, there was some dude on a he had an iron lung, and he would roll himself in there somehow, and he wasn't the iron lung in the presentation, but he was like he had an iron lung for treatment purposes. Some guy in a bed would roll himself in there. Some lady who was blind was there, vision impairment, cerebral palsy, the whole thing, the whole gamut of people, and architects were, I know they were just scared, but this is how I mean, Sydney is the epicenter of accessibility, I think, because all these people went back and empowered, Evan, they were empowered by that experience, gone from no one listens to me to telling these guys how to build a building, and they're doing what I'm saying, and they've gone back into their local councils and made sure that the council created development control plans revolving around accessibility.
Yeah. So, and if to go full circle, we're already working on the Brisbane 32 games as Jensen Hughes, right? And it's 7 years out, and we're already doing work on it. It's a completely different landscape now, right? It was called up as a last piece before Sydney. Sydney changed it, and now we're one of the first things that you have to think of if you're going to create a global event like the Olympics or Paralympics, being a Paralympian, just pushing the Paralympics there.
Yeah. And that's why Sydney became, very bullish on accessibility through all development control plans, which are mandated in DA consent conditions. So the certifiers couldn't just sign off on it. They said, we have to get an access consultant in because it says accredited access consultant, right? down in Victoria, they've had there's no such thing as DCPs down there, but what they have had, they've had some big voices within government. Michael Walker down there, who's really pushed universal design accessibility from within government. And before he was Nick Morris Godding was Morris Walker. So he teamed up with Mick Walker, and he was a part of that, and so he's done amazing things down there. And some, people within government pushing the agenda, I know Paul Nanari from the state government, New South Wales, he's done a lot of the great event work, pushed universal barrow. But it's people there that make sure that they get, the briefing right. And that's the most important part about accessibility. It's not site inspections at OC stage because the horse is bolted. It's not getting the design reviews at design development stage. The horse is bolted. How can you implement accessibility requirements when the structural engineer and electrical engineers have all done their thing and you've got to move columns around? You can't do it. It starts at concept stage, like right from the start, to get the spine of accessibility laid out beautifully, so it doesn't cost anything else to rectify. And if you do that, you get a good job. And again, that's why guys like Len Leitz, and I bring these guys up, but like they are, they're really the shining light on the hill in terms of accessibility, because they make sure they get an access consultant there from day dot, and MGAC as well. Actually, MGAC do that a lot now as well. And I'm sure there's other excellent organisations down in Victoria that do that as well.
Perfect. A lot of information for us all to absorb there, David. Thank you very much for coming in today, David. And
okay, no worries. Thanks.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the JH Insider Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and you took something valuable from it. If you did, please make sure to subscribe and follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling really generous, please leave us a positive review. It really helps us grow and it will help us reach more listeners just like you. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn at Jensen Hughes Pacific or via our website at www.jensenhughes.com/Pacific.